As you all probably know, the meetings are hosted by the Chamber and sponsored by AT&T. And today we have with us our Senator Randall Hardy, Representative Stephen Johnson, Representative Diana Dirks, and Representative J.R. Clays. So we'll start with opening remarks and then questions from you all, which if you could write them down, there'll be people that you can bring, Dawn and Eric will bring them up here for you. And then we'll also offer some time for closing remarks from our representatives as well. So with that, we'll start with Senator Hardy.
Welcome to the Legislative Forum. Thursday morning, we did not know if we would even be here. We were designated to work this weekend to get things done, to wrap up, start to wrap up our big issues, and things weren't in place for us to do that, and so they sent us home yesterday, and so here we are. Thanks to AT&T for sponsoring this event. A couple things I have. If you're not on my email newsletter list, I have a sign-up sheet in the back. Right now I have 670 people that are receiving it on a weekly basis through the session, and I'd like to have about 6,000. So I'm short a little bit, and if you can, so you can help me by adding your name to that list. Second, I brought a copy of a bill with me. It's down here on the table. This is House Bill 2006 that was introduced by Representative Clays that determined what would happen when a county commission is enlarged. As you recall, when we went from 3 county commission districts to 5, there was turmoil in how those 2 districts, extra districts, received a commissioner. And so this bill addressed that issue, and I helped shepherd the bill through the Senate, and so I have a ceremonial copy of the bill up here on the table. If you'd like to see what a bill looks like, there it is. I think I'm not going to go into specific bills at the moment, but I would like to give you my general impression about what's going on right now. We have big issues. We've saved them all for the end. And being the new kid on the block, it's interesting for me to see the politics that's behind some of this stuff. The bills that are stuck in Fed and State Committee because they want them to go into effect without debate. We have to me, it looks like a middle school dance on this tax bill, where you don't really know where your partner is, and you don't want to know. You don't really know who wants to go first, and you don't really know how it's going to turn out, and you don't really know if you even want to talk about it. And so it's really been an interesting process. I've have the dubious distinction of voting for almost every tax bill that's come up because I'm so desperate. I'm starting to take a hit on it. I'm realizing that as well. But we're in very bad shape fiscally, and I would like to put a dent in it. And I think what's happened at this stage of the game, that people are understanding that we can't fix the whole situation in one bill. It's going to take multiple bills. So what I'm thinking is likely to happen is that we'll pass something that will stop the hemorrhaging, will right the ship, get us moving in a different direction, and then we'll come back in another couple of years and have to address things again. There's been a tug of war between do we do tax bill first? Do we do school finance first? That one's been, and I understand the dynamics there. It's technically speaking, you should probably know how much money you need to raise before you pass a tax bill, but some of that is above my pay grade at the moment. So anyway, that's what's going on. And from my perspective in Topeka, I really appreciate people being in touch with me. I've tried to be responsive to people that have sent me mail or called me or emailed me. I like the communications from the district, and I hope you keep it up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Hardy, and I'll echo his thanks to everyone, and particularly for taking your time to be here today. So good to get to be with you. jump straight into some of the things that are going on. And of course, it's budget, education, and taxes are the big three. There are other important issues, so not to miss those. Very important to get a couple other key pieces addressed as we go through. I think on the House side, we're fortunate here in that we have the Vice Chair of Education and one of the budget chairs, and then I can deal with some of the tax issues. We'll try and go as you desire on each of those. So the acronym would be BET if you put budget, education, and taxes together, although I don't know anyone's taking any. So on taxes, we did start out of the gate. The one thing that I'm pretty certain of is the change in the business tax law, that will happen. That has been in virtually every proposal that has gained any traction in either the House, Senate committees. I don't know all of the Senate committee bills. On the floor of either chamber and in the conference committee presentations that we've had so far. So that's kind of the framework that's been going on for the last 2 years. I expect that to be part of it. From there, the plans vary, and gaining agreement at a point in time is challenging. What folks want on any given day is somewhat different. If we looked at the plan that we have right now and rolled that back to January and offered that plan, some of the folks who don't want to vote for it today would have been thrilled with it then. The hindsight is always somewhat useful. A number of folks wish that the bill that had not overridden the veto was now passed. However, had we passed it in February, then many people would be dissatisfied that they would have thought for the rest of the session, oh, we could have gotten by with less, or oh, we needed more. So the satisfaction is never easily achieved. Everything went pretty much nowhere on Thursday, but I think it fell into a better place. We'll be looking at a bill on Monday that has rates of 3%, 5.25%, and 5.6%. Has a slightly higher fiscal note than the bill that failed in February, but only slightly higher. It is all and only on income tax. There are several other bills offered with a lot of other components that are in them. I think it's hard to speculate on the future of any of those. I think something similar to what we're looking at in that income tax type bill will be ultimately what passes. I'm not sure what the order will be. I don't know if we'll get an education funding bill before we do the tax bill. There are people insistent that one must go before the other, and there isn't a perfect or right order. So there are some reasons behind, well, we'd like to know what we could actually pass in taxes. Well, I'd like to say we can say this is the number we need, therefore this is the tax plan we need. It doesn't seem to work that way. I'll have folks that say, I cannot vote for a rate above X. I cannot vote for a rate above X. That becomes very relevant when I have to get the 2/3 majority. It is hard to pass a tax plan on a simple majority, and the 2/3 majority is the challenge that we're finding is a high bar to get something actually passed that can become law. So I'll welcome your questions, and thanks for being here.
Good morning. It's always delightful to be back home again. I return to what now I call Sunrise Lake, which is in my backyard. We do need the moisture, but perhaps not all at one time. Thanks to AT&T and to Chamber of Commerce for sponsoring this. It was really touch and go as to whether or not, again, we were going to be able to be here today. Tried to keep in communication with Don and said, it's anybody's guess. I'm going to go right to the chase here. There are so many things that, as Representatives Johnson and Senator Hardy has mentioned already, there are so many things going on in the State House. I chose in the interim to sit in on the K-12 Budget Committee. I'm not a member of that particular committee. If you're interested in at your leisure reading, this is the education funding bill, 185 pages of it. And then I also have a supplemental, which is a little easier to read. I, too, have a sheet for you. It's over here on this table to sign up if you are not receiving my newsletter. The news has been kind of sporadic because some of the committees really weren't doing much other than I did sit on the general government budget, which take care of all the fee-funded entities. Of course, we're all anxious to see what's going to come out of tax. We've looked at several variations, again, as repeating what Representative Johnson said, that we are having to look at, do we have something that's going to get those 63 votes? And if we did, do we have 84 if we have to have an override, which we've already had to do a couple of times this past year. Speaking of just a couple of bills, House Bill 2184, which is dear to Representative Clays and myself because this deals with the Salina Star Bonds, which is now in Senate, as to whether or not the Senate is going to pass out, that they will be able to get it passed in order to extend the sunset. If that does not happen, we are going to be in a world of hurt financially. So it's vitally important. So we're going to leave that as a challenge to Senator Hardy to stand up and make sure that gets done before the cutoff date. No challenge at all, is it? Okay. Senate Bill 100 is one that I carried on the House floor. This dealt with concerning mental health nurses into this nursing services scholarship program. The nursing services in the mental health arena is really vital, and there is a shortage. So we passed a bill in hopes that a scholarship program will include them to maybe interest them to get into the mental health arena, because it's vitally important today. I've received several emails and calls on the side of the equation as to the important debate on passing the gun safety bill. Yesterday on the House floor, as we entered the chamber, there were several members, moms, all carrying their signs. So there's concern on both sides of the fence. Whether or not that will come on the House floor is rather questionable. If not, I think it would be a good idea to have an opportunity to debate it, not just do it in some kind of a conference committee. I have a whole sheet of information here on the education funding bill, and would be willing to answer any questions that I can. There were over 80 amendments during the process in putting this bill together, and I have to give kudos to those members on that committee. It was a daunting task for them to come up with what they've done is gone back to the original funding formula that we had prior to the block grant, with some enhancements, some takeaways, and some additions. So those, I'll be happy to answer your questions and give you the opportunity. I'll stay late here and answer any questions that you may have, because it will take quite a while. But thank you once again for coming today, and I'm glad to be here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you again to the Salina Chamber and AT&T for hosting the event, and of course everyone for giving up your Saturday morning to be here today. I don't have a lot to add, but I would just note a few things. There's a lot of talk about the big three items: the tax, the budget, the school finance plan, but I would submit that there's a big four that exist, and that fourth piece is what we require to keep going down the road that we're on. As we continue to demand the services and the amenities that we want in our community, simply raising taxes to be California in nature isn't a road that we're capable of going down. We simply don't have the jobs to support the tax level that we would require to pave the roads the way we want them paved. And I think that as we start to look at what we need to accomplish, the word is growth, and growth is going to come through incentivizing the types of jobs that we want here in our community. There are three bills out there that exist. Diana mentioned one, Star Bonds, probably the most effective economic development tool that we have in the state of Kansas, and it expires June 30th. We must have that, not just for Salina, but for the whole state. We must extend that. 2168 is a bill that's called the Ad Astra Rural Jobs Act. That incentivizes investment in small and startup businesses, giving them the capital they need to grow. That needs to happen in communities like Salina for us to bring the jobs that we want to have, the premium wage jobs, that then bring the people or employ the people who are already here who are working 2 jobs. We can talk about our low unemployment rate, and it's quite impressive, being below 4%. But when those individuals are taking 2 jobs along South 9th Street at a Starbucks, a Chick-fil-A, I hear we're getting a Pepper Jack's, that's fantastic. But those are not the jobs that sustain families. They just simply aren't. And then finally, I'd just throw in there a bill that's near and dear to my heart and should be yours too, and that's HB 2036. And that is the Aviation Aerospace Education Tax Credit. And that does 2 things for Salina. It incentivizes attendance at K-State Polytechnic, first of all, and then it incentivizes the businesses that would then come to do the manufacturing and the research that is being talked about and discussed and is being is the purpose of the education at K-State Polytechnic. Those 3 together all have a huge outsized impact on Salina. And without those, simply coming in and taxing everyone a little more or a lot more, having a budget that spends more than we have in the history of the state, and going down that road, that's not going to solve the problem. That's going to exacerbate the problem. I would point out that our current budget strips every single penny out of the state highway fund that is put in there by the sales tax. Every single penny, and that's with the tax increases that have been discussed here today. Every cent gets taken out. That didn't solve the problem. What solves the problem is growing, and we're not doing that. Being a community under 50,000 has serious negative impact on us, and stalling at 48 just simply isn't an option. So we need to start thinking in terms of the big 4, because without that 4th component, your taxes went up, your people are fleeing, your kids are getting a great education and then moving to Texas. That's just simply a path that we can't continue down if we want our kids to stay here, to have good jobs, and raise their families here in Salina. Again, thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you all for your opening remarks. I'll start with the first question we got, since it was the very first one. Not part of the big 4. Why no guns allowed in the governor's mansion and the state house? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So I think the question obviously is related to the guns. The gun.
Guns are allowed in the state house. We in fact do allow them. They do have security and metal detectors, and they ask that you declare them. But I believe that other than that, I have no idea what happens at the governor's mansion or how that's set up. So that would be a question for someone else. But the state house is a concealed carry building in the state of Kansas.
We even have some legislators that carry. Unfortunately, in the Education Committee, one of the legislators got excited about something, took his gun out and put it underneath the table, and then forgot to pick it up and leave, and so it was left in the Education Committee room. So there are ideas that perhaps that's not really the greatest place to bring your gun, is in a committee setting. So it made me a little nervous, because, there have been accidents when they've gone off. So, I mean, if that would have come out of his holster wherever he didn't ask him where he had it hidden. But, that could be a danger. So I think there are always consequences for things.
I was going to throw out another topic. When I first heard in January that concealed carry was allowed in the legislature, and I knew that legislators could carry because we go through doors that are not secured. Then I said, "Is that really true that people can just walk in here concealed carry?" And they said, "Oh yeah, they can just show us their weapons, but we make sure that we tell them if we have an incident, do not draw your weapon."
Interesting commentary. All right. The second one is, can each of you tell us, are you a member of ALEC And have you received any expenses from ALEC? And I believe ALEC, they're referencing the American Legislative Exchange Council. I had to look it up on my phone, to be honest with you, so.
I don't happen to be a member of ALEC currently. I'd consider going to their meetings. I would go to most. I've not made it to one, but if I ever had a chance to make it, I've gone to some with the CSG group. But so far, that's the only one I've made. So, and no, I haven't happened to receive any reimbursement.
I'm not a member of ALEC. I belong to the two other groups that we automatically belong to. One's called the CSG, or the Council of State Governments, and the NCSL, which is National Conference of State Legislatures. And I will be attending meetings with those two groups, but not with ALEC.
I am not a member of ALEC and never have been since the onset. I think that the decisions that I make come from my constituents and not from that particular source.
A member of CSG, NCSL, and ALEC attend all of their meetings. As far as reimbursement, they each do that differently. So I believe ALEC does scholarship to pay for hotel and flight, specifically for reimbursement. So yes, I have received those reimbursements, but those are not from the state. Those are from ALEC itself.
Okay, thank you. This one is for Senator Hardy specifically. It says an override of Governor Brownback's veto of an early revenue bill failed by 2 or 3 votes. Could you please speak to changing Senate leadership? Might be a little tricky to do that one.
Oh, that is a tricky question. The freshman class in the Senate has had frustrations with Senate leadership. That's not really a secret. And we've had a very good relationship with some of the leadership. In fact, we have regular meetings, sometimes twice a week, with part of the leadership. And things get complicated because some of the things that come into play is like somebody's thinking of running for governor, or somebody's thinking about running for the 2nd congressional district already, things like that. And so that starts to shape the way that you vote. And that has become an issue for the freshman class of senators. And but in terms of changing leadership, it's not really something that is being considered. What we're trying to do instead, I think, is to educate and win over those 3 additional votes that would be needed to override a governor's veto of a tax plan. And I think that is probably more likely the way that we would go in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. This one, I'm not sure if there'll be somebody well-versed to answer this one, or all of you should, but this is: with transportation monies being diverted, have you considered privatizing roads?
Short answer, no. With the transportation money being diverted, the answer is probably going to be, and not that I necessarily agree with this, but the answer is probably going to be that a motor fuel tax makes the most sense. It's more tied to the use of the road, pays for them directly, and more importantly, it is constitutionally protected dollars. So when I say that the money has been swept out of the state highway fund, we're talking about the sales tax portion that goes in, which is around $500 million roughly. There's another $740 million that comes in through the motor fuels tax, and then about $200 million in registration fees that go into the state highway fund. Roughly $1 billion sits in there from those two sources. Those 2 sources are constitutionally protected. They can't be swept out. They can't be used for some other purpose. They back bonds. They do things like that. So having that source be a static source that can't be touched, as opposed to the sales tax, tends to make a lot more sense. And I know that it's been floated in several different versions, all the way from a 10-cent increase to a 5-cent to what looked to be in the latest proposals about a 3-cent. A 3-cent only gets you about $54 million, 5-cent about $90 million, 10-cent double that. That's not even close to what's being taken out in the sales tax portion of the state highway fund, and it's caused us a complete halt to all projects. So we don't have new projects being let. We do have some maintenance. To give you an idea of what maintenance costs to maintain the level of infrastructure that we're accustomed to, and we're accustomed to a top 5 infrastructure in the state of Kansas, which stop getting used to that. The number 1 rural interstate system in the country as of 2014. We're going to spend $44 million in FY 2018 on maintenance. And the average across the T-Works program for maintenance has been about $380 million in maintenance and preservation. The lack of dollars being put into that now ends up costing us a tremendous amount of money going forward as we lose those roads to a lack of maintenance over time. So this isn't something that you'll see today, but it is something you'll see 3, 4, 5 years from now as those roads begin to deteriorate in such a way that they can no longer receive the lower cost maintenance and preservation, but instead have to be dug up and started over again. We've put through a proposal that allows for another $400 million in bonding across the 2 years as a stopgap because the tax plans tend not to address this issue. That 400 would then allow us to push up the number in 18 from 45 to 350. And then in 2019, we have about 250 million dedicated to preservation, and that would push that back up to 350 as well to get us kind of towards that average amount so that we can float that. But that's $400 million in bond debt that now sits out there for taxpayers to pay over time. It's about $32 million a year over a 20-year period that we'll be paying for preservation that lasts typically 7 years is about your average on preservation. However, we've asked KDOT to also identify bridges because bridge replacement can be a part of your preservation program so that we can extend the life expectancy of that from 7 years to the course of the bond proposal. It's not ideal. None of this is, but the alternative is, like I said, California-style taxes, and I just don't think we're ready for that. So we'll do our best to keep the roads in good repair, and I forget what the original question was, but we probably won't have toll roads expanding across the state. Though the KTA, I mean, is super well managed. They're going through $1 billion program right now of revitalizing their roads. They're putting in the toll lanes where you're able to just keep on driving at full speed. They're doing some great things over there, but that is a wholly separate entity that has a partnership with KDOT, but does not. They do not commingle funds. So, hope that answered the question.
I think it did. Thank you. This one is, when do you see Medicaid expansion passing? And again, I'm not sure if there's one of you that's more well-suited than another, or if all of you'd like to comment. Or none.
So Medicaid expansion did pass the House and Senate, was vetoed, and we failed to override the veto. Based on that, I don't see it passing this session. I don't know if there's a chance next session, but that's one of the issues. I'm trying to remember now. I've focused so much on a couple of tax details. If some of the changes in federal law change how that plays out, if we would change where we are, but I know there's some discussion of that as well. But based on the outcome of that vote, I think it'll be difficult to pass.
In visiting with some of those representatives from the hospitals, they are still hopeful that they can work on some type of a solution, something else. But of course, we're at the end of the session. I don't see anything happening until next year. But we are still going to be continuing to fight for Medicaid expansion. It's vitally needed. Hospitals are having difficulty. Some are on the brink of having to close the doors. One of which was in Wellington when we were dairy farmers. I utilized that hospital, and it was a vital link in that particular community when we lived there. And I would hope that that would continue to be that way. I will continue to fight for Medicaid expansion. I think it's necessary for those who need medical care and to keep these hospitals vibrant.
31 states have expanded Medicaid in their states, and that equates to 62 senators on the congressional level. And 62 out of 100 means that there's going to be a lot of pushback when it comes to what happens to Medicaid as part of any health care program that's passed on the federal level. That being the case, I think that Medicaid should be addressed on the state level. As Representative Dirks alluded to, we have 31 hospitals in the state of Kansas, rural hospitals that are showing signs of closing. And part of that comes from the inability of the hospitals to charge patients. You know, anyone that walks into the emergency room of a hospital is treated, but not every person that walks into the hospital pays. And when that happens, the only way that hospitals can be reimbursed is by charitable donations or some other function, because they don't have the ability to charge those patients, and they don't have, if patients had the ability to have Medicaid, they could walk into the hospital and the hospital would at least receive something for their services. I'm in that kind of situation. You know, I was a business owner for 25 years, and I was not in the habit of just letting people walk out without paying for services. We did have a few people that would renege on their bills, but we had ways of dealing with that. But you can't do that as a hospital and be healthy for very long. And so I think we do need to expand it so that people have choices, so they stop using emergency rooms as their primary care physician, and that we start reimbursing hospitals for the good work that they do provide for the citizens.
This question is for Senator Hardy and for Representative Dirks, and it is the convention related to the Convention of States project. It says, please co-sponsor the Convention of States application. We have Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, and a total of 12 states have passed our application. Would you consider, or we need you as a co-sponsor. So if either of you would comment on that, or both of you.
I've been visited by the Convention of States folks in Topeka. It's a very passionate group of folks, and with some good ideas. And I've got that in my head, that concept, but it's right now it's frankly it's on the back burner just because of all of the other issues that are confronting us at the moment. I think it's something that needs to be talked about and considered. I'm only one person, but I'm willing to enter into the discussion for that.
I would probably go along with what Senator Hardy has to say. At this particular point, we have so many things on our plate that we have to just target focus of what we need to do to get these things passed. Medicaid expansion, the school finance formula bill, just our budget, a tax plan. There's so many things out there that are key to the whole complete operation of our state. And we want to be able to maintain what we have been able to do and to grow in economic development, Medicare, taking care of our own. And so that would be something, that at some point in time I would be happy to have a conversation. But at this particular moment, we really have so many things that have to be done. And it's not that we're trying to avoid the issue, trust me. It's just that we have so many things on our plate, as you can see, that really has to be considered first. Thank you.
All right. This one is to all of you. And it is, will you take and accept overtime pay for this session, or if this session goes past the 100 days?
I will not.
I haven't thought about it. If it's important to you that I not take the pay, I'm very willing to forego that, whether you want it to be both the salary and the per diem or what feedback you have. So I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards.
I really haven't thought about it very much myself. My thought about this whole thing is if I'm part of the decision in how many days this session goes, if I'm part of the decision of how things evolve and where they go and the timing of that, I'm more than happy to be part of that process. But if I'm not consulted, then I feel like I'm doing some good for the district that includes Salina and Dickinson counties, and I'm there working every day. I'm there first thing in the morning and stay late at night, and so frankly, I'm doing a day's work, and I don't mind being paid for working there.
The way that our calendar is set up, even numbered years are limited to 90 days. Odd numbered years are not. So we're not actually in overtime at any point in time during the odd numbered years. So there wouldn't be a overtime to withdraw pay from. It's 90 days that can be extended in even years. And being in an odd year, that wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you all. This one is probably Representative Johnson, and you spoke to this a little bit in your opening remarks, but perhaps you have more to share. What is the status on the income tax? And then this maybe is everyone, but just why are the bigger issues being ignored?
So I apologize earlier. I did send a text message in that some of the leaders in the Senate are meeting with the staff in Topeka trying to work on a bill currently. It's an ongoing thing, as Senator Hardy alluded. Usually my last calls are around 10 o'clock with either Democrat members of my own committee or leaders in the Senate. And typically the first calls are pretty early. There are some folks that like to start at 6. I sometimes catch those. I sometimes return them a little bit later. But whatever those topics are, there are a ton of efforts going on tax. The good news right now is virtually everyone is engaged on the issue. Unfortunately, that's also the bad news. So we've had folks work hard on solutions that might eliminate some of the sales tax exemptions. It's a very popular concept. It was the one that everyone started with at the beginning and demanded that's what we're going to do. And I simply said, that's great. Tell me which ones. All of them. Great. Let's go through the list. And the good news is some people actually took that on and have done it and have a recommendation that did pass the House narrowly. The effort to raise funds passed with 63. The effort to allocate them passed with 117. So it did make it. That's one of the efforts that's going on. I don't know if it's ultimately successful. There are other efforts that relate to property tax that are going on. I don't think those will be successful. It is possible that raising the mill levy will be part of the education funding formula. Part of the discussion in this morning was whether that part of the tax policy will be part of the education funding bill or part of the tax bill. That's relevant to what we put in the tax bill or the next tax bill on Monday. So why they were having that discussion today as they worked through it. The list does go on. The summary that I go back to is I believe it will be an income tax plan. We didn't leave it till the end. We introduced the repeal of the business income tax on the first day of the session, on Monday afternoon, after we were sworn in, to the shock of many people, and heard the bill that week. We had the first bill out of the committee across the House floor, across the Senate floor, across the governor's desk, back across the House floor, and into the Senate in February. It's also not very common. The challenge, again, is the bar of how do I get that to agree to. So there's an earlier question to Senator Hardy that I probably should have addressed, how to get those last 3 votes. That's part of my challenge. And why I engage with that group to start with, to say, okay, how do I get, I describe it as the bus that both, and if I refer to their first names, Senator Jim Denning and Minority Leader Jim Ward both want to get on. It's not easy to design that bus. both have good ideas. Both are very bright. Um, both hold their ideas very dearly. And working through that process is where we are. Unfortunately, as I look at it, I measure results by results and not activity. Activity is great, and that's going on a lot. We do have to get to agreement. I do think we're closer. I do think we fell apart to a better place on Thursday by looking at, do we run the full repeal that some are asking for, but we know ultimately cannot become law. It will pass, but it will not sustain a veto. I think we were wise to go ahead and say, let's not take that extra 3 days. Let's focus on something that might be able to pass and what that looks like. Nonetheless, that dance, as described, will continue. And it's not just two people that have to agree. It's some that really do not want to dance with each other. But we're going to have to be able to get there. So I don't know if that provides any clarity or not, but it's been quite an education for me through the last weeks.
Some very good analogies there. I really appreciate those. Okay. This one is related to, and I think we had some questions similar to this last time, and I can't remember if we got to them or not, but it's if you could give your thoughts on what the state should do to fill and or keep current employees. And then I think related to that is, when do you start paying state employees what they should be paid? And I believe it's, if I remember correctly from the last time, it's maybe been a while since they've received a raise. So.
Great question. One that we've talked about for a long time. One that was talked about in the campaign is one of the top priorities by, I think, many folks as they looked at education being key, as they looked at how, particularly once the cut to the medical areas was made by the governor last spring, another key that had to be addressed. And generally, the state employee salaries were on the heels of that. In particular, if there wasn't a chance for you to change position or move up, there hasn't been a raise now for nearly a decade. So something that has to be considered as we look at what services do we need and how do we keep the people we really want. We need good people. Any organization is only as good as its people. So that is one of the priorities. As we get to the funding realities, there are two pieces that are increasing at a very rapid rate. Currently, one of them now is the education piece to catch up there. Another one is the CAPERS piece to catch up there, which is is a part of the total employee compensation package, but doesn't give them the spendable money that they need to keep up with inflation. Still part of what we have, still real dollars that we have to come up with. That increase in this year's budget is right at $350 million between those two items. Next year, it is right at $500 million in a year. That is the appetite that is currently capturing slightly more than the highest tax packages that have passed. If I fully fund each of those two without funding anything else and without providing anything for roads, I must pass every tax package that has been introduced. And I still don't fully meet those items. I won't get to pass each of them that are introduced. Unfortunately, I fear that this year, again, only a very few, I think a few of the judicial branch employees are slated to get a modest increase this year. I'm not sure how much broader that goes. If Representative Clays has any thoughts on what it has or might happen on the Budget Committee. Unfortunately, I fear I don't have good news on what I can actually deliver out of the tax plan for this year on employee salaries.
There are a few areas where we've been able to increase pay or create rank and pay plans to address things like recruitment and retention. There is, I think, on the Senate side, a 2% across the board increase for all state employees, in as much as 2% really moves the needle for anyone with higher healthcare costs and all of that. But I guess everybody has that issue. However, there are two areas where we pull money from, and that's why it's been a little easier to deal with. I won't say easier, but I guess it's been possible to deal with recruitment and retention issues in places like the Highway Patrol, the KBI, soon the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, when we're talking about wardens and officers there, and in the corrections on parole officers and then corrections officers as well. And that's because we have either efficiencies that are being gained within the department so that they're not requiring an increase in their actual line item for the budget out of SGF, the State General Fund, or they have fee fund dollars that are available to facilitate implementing that raise. And when it comes to the public safety side, we have implemented raises over time. Only partially in corrections, we were able to do that with about $2.5 million that we found over there. There is a second level of raises that will be available as the Lansing project comes to fruition here over the next 2 years, where the savings that's created by creating efficiencies through a more modern prison reduces the number of employees that are necessary, and of course that reduction in payroll then pays the lease purchase or bonding payment. But there's also an amount that's around $1.5 to $2 million that's saved there that then will be, at least in the House budget plan, will then be targeted towards raises across the correction system. Wildlife and Parks is another area where there's a large fee fund that has about $5 million in it to give those officers a raise and a rank and pay plan that's equivalent of the Kansas Highway Patrol one that we implemented, which the KBI is also moving on to this coming fiscal year on July 1. That was about $850,000 out of a fund that has about $5 million sitting in it. So those funds exist, and those funds make it possible to put targeted raises into areas where we have recruitment and retention issues. Across the state, I don't know that every area has a recruitment and retention issue. I don't know that we have a problem to solve necessarily, but I do know that we had a problem there, that we had a problem with our law enforcement because we weren't competitive anymore with local law enforcement agencies, regional law enforcement agencies. So we were seeing classes canceled at the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Academy here in Salina. We were seeing classes that graduated 6. And then we implemented the pay plan, and we had a class of 20, then 40, then 45. And it completely turned around the prospect for having such declining numbers that we only had 280 highway patrolmen across the state of Kansas, only covering about a third of the state. So we were able to reverse that completely over the course of about 2 years. That's now happening with the KBI. As we move into this next fiscal year, they'll be able to hire 12 new scientists to go in there and do all of the backlog of testing that needs to be done. And then on the wildlife and parks side, we have a recruitment and retention issue there that's being solved through that. That one's not in my committee, so I did that in appropriations just to bring all law enforcement along that same plan, same rank pay plan, kept them inside the classified system while we did that too. And that process has just taken time to kind of get to that spot. But overall, as far as just blanket raises, I think the 2% plan is probably the most likely to occur. It's a very difficult budget year, so again, we're giving up roads, or we're bonding debt, or we're, those kinds of things are happening because, again, and Representative Johnson alluded to it, that the real number that you have to hit is closer to about $2 billion if you want to fund all of this stuff. And I just don't think anyone in this room or anyone out there watching on the Salina Access TV are ready to pay the type of taxes that are necessary to finance all of that. It's quite a sizable number, and unless you're the beneficiary of those dollars, it's a very difficult pill to swallow.
Representative Clays reminded me of an important point, and that is the Senate budget. It is not in the House budget, but it is in the Senate budget. And last night, their budget analyst sent me a copy of theirs that I was just reviewing to look at. And in part of our conversation this morning, there was some talk of what flexibility we might have in the 2019 payment, given that we think we have an underestimate in what's raised in the business income tax. And with that, there might, I don't know where the negotiations will come out between the House and Senate on that budget item, but that would still be at least in play on, again, while it's not a restoration of where folks would be over time, that 2% may still be, is it 2 or 2.5? Is it 2? Okay, great. So thank you for that reminder.
Thank you. And I have another issue. You know, this, when I said that this whole problem cannot be solved in 1 year, the pay issue definitely cannot be solved in one session, and it needs to be addressed. My last trip to Salina, I think it was, not last trip, a couple weeks ago, I made a visit to the 28th District Court, City County building. Most people don't like to go there, and most people don't have to go there unless they like doing jury duty or whatever. But I actually took asked for a tour, and they were very gracious to give me a tour of on the 3rd floor. And as soon as I walked through the door, I was struck by stories that you should not have to hear. You should be talking to people that love their jobs dearly, that are dedicated to the department, but 30% of those folks in that office said, you know what, it'd be nice if I didn't have to have a second job to pay my bills. 25%, no, I'm sorry, the average salary in the judiciary system is less than the poverty level for a family of 4, which is around $25,000. And that equates to an 18 to 20% rate of quitting and early retirement, and you know, it just made me sad to hear that we treat our employees that way. A 2% pay raise is as good as we can do this year if it gets passed, and it doesn't even touch the problem that exists in that department. In 2006, I think we had 40,000 employees. We now have around 36,000 employees in the state. We're big business. We really are. And a lot of those positions, I'm frankly think that we ought to be looking at reducing the level of government, but we ought to do it in a way that reduces services that are not important to the citizens of Kansas. We should not be reducing workers in the state system because we cannot be competitive anymore. And at least in KDOT, we're not able to maintain full employment at the levels we are now because we cannot provide pay that is competitive. And so you ought to be in a system and running a business. You know that if you have an 18 to 20% turnover rate in your employment, so there's something seriously wrong with your business. And that's the way I look at it at the state level. If we're at that stage of the game in the judiciary, I think about how expensive it is to hire and retrain. You're losing a lot of institutional memory. You're losing a lot of experience when people turn over, and they're also they're being promoted to the feds too. That's another way that we lose judiciary folks. But that's expensive. So why don't we pour that money into keeping the people that we have, so that we don't have to experience that turnover rate. So it's a very frustrating thing to me, and it's something that I'm going to keep at until that issue is resolved.
Okay, thank you. This question is fairly general, but I suspect that each of you will maybe be able to speak to something specific, and it is, when do you start holding people accountable for the state funds that they receive? And so again, it's a very general question, but maybe each of you has something that you could speak to on that.
Thanks a lot, guys. Sometimes you kind of feel a little outnumbered here. I guess, really, if you look at it educationally, the teachers that we have here from K-12 up through graduation and the jobs that they are performing to make sure that our children are educated, become successful as young adults when they leave the educational arena, how do you put a price on that? Very honestly, if you look at the K through 12 budget, not all of that folks are going to salaries. We have created a barrier at our state lines from allowing people to really get the funds that they necessarily need. We are not seeing those individuals coming from Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Colorado, flocking to Kansas to become teachers. First of all, simply because we haven't been able to adequately fund education. The new finance bill addresses that, but it's not adequate. I'm afraid at the end of the day, when we do pass this funding formula bill and the money, and I have all of the bullet points here, the facts and figures, I still believe we're still going to be in a lawsuit. I'm hoping that the courts look at it, that we're trying, but it's still not adequately funded. So you're looking at wages here in our state, that's one big fund right there. So when we're looking at things that maybe we need to fund, that maybe we could not have to fund, maybe cuts, lots of cuts, we've already seen that. The last 2 years, there have been more cuts to services across our state than it has been since I've been living here, a long time. So we need to look at the whole picture. And I'd be happy to visit with each and every one of you if you have questions in that regard. But trust me, the funds that we have are just sparingly going out to those entities that need them to keep them in business. So I don't really feel that we're overly funding things. I think we just need to look at what they are. And there are always ways and means. You know, I have a business and I have to watch my bottom line. But you also have to look at what type of service you're able to provide if you're not adequately funding them. So don't look at that as oh boy, you know, we could cut on these funds. No, we can't. And if you sit in those seats as we do on all these committees in the Commerce and in Tax Committee and some of the Senate committees that the senator sits on, and when you have time and you sit there and for hours thinking about how are we going to fund this? How are we going to fund education for sure? Each and every one of those committee members on those 85 different amendments were trying to make it that we can adequately fund without taking away from some other entity within our state. And if you have a solution for that, please let us know, because each and every one of us are diligently trying to find a solution. We are on a slippery slope in our state at this point. I always try to be positive. My husband says, you are the most positive individual, but sometimes you have to look at the negativity, which I don't like to do. But we have so many services that we desperately need to maintain here in Kansas to keep us one of the best states in the union. I'm proud of this state, but we need to turn it around. We need to right that ship, and we're looking at each and every fund that's being financed. We need to be able to move forward, even if it's micro steps. And that's what we're looking for. That's what Representative Johnson and his tax committee, and that's why we've had so many versions of it. We're trying to keep the burden off of your shoulders, but at the same time, trying to come up with the adequacy of funding that will keep us and maintain the services that we have. KDOT, which was already mentioned, education, healthcare, taking care of the elderly, making sure people who live in those particular entities that are taking care of those who can no longer take care of themselves. Those are the things we have to picture before we can put a price tag on it, and then we can figure out how we can fund it?
I think that's a great question that is at the core of what we're trying to do. And the core of what we're trying to do is actually not just a we question, but it's a we question. So all of us, particularly those of you who are engaged in the community, are in a great place to answer or address that question. So we talked about some of the key areas. I've gotten a lot of feedback on some of the activity that was done along K4, where some felt we were not spending money wisely. That's actually really useful feedback to say, okay, is this going to serve a need? Are the signs that are put in there going to serve a need? Is the project, et cetera? So that discussion is really useful as we see what's going on in the details in our community. If we expand that to other areas, the discussion around was the K-10 extension to Olathe from Lawrence, a good thing to do. Can we afford to do those things? That is actually our discussion as we look at that. To the school piece, which is huge. The great news about schools and accountability is I think our school boards are accountable. They work really hard at that. And if there are questions, I'll bet that they would welcome the chance to have that dialogue, even if it is uncomfortable. Is there ever negativity, you think? Maybe. But that is at where we find it. The farther you aggregate things up, the harder it is to determine efficiency. And I won't claim that we're efficient with everything, but when I go to visit the corrections facility or those types of things, or if I work with that, that is when I better see and where I better decide, what if we did this with our technology, or if we did this with our utilities? Are there small things that we can do? Are there big things that we can do? How much do we wish to invest in technology for that service is actually a decision we will make better together as we're dealing with that service. As we get to some of the social services one, that is always harder to really get your arms around each thing, and I'll hear the story of someone that sold their card for cash, and that's something that none of us want to have happen. And I have looked at that only briefly. I know there are some folks that work in that department very hard to try and find or change processes to help the people we really do want to help without having that inefficiency. So as you bounce into those things, let us know, let other people know, let the folks who are running that area know that you and we are trying to watch and actually help. Because most of our good employees want to be efficient as well. Again, I get the perception. I'll drive by something and think, why are we doing that? But there are so many things I won't drive by or see, and that's why everybody's eyes are really helpful. So actually, thank you for raising that issue, and if there are some specifics that are behind that question, I'd love to hear that as well. So appreciate that.
Thank you. In the school funding debate, the Supreme Court has said that we're not spending, not targeting our funds sufficiently to the lower quartile of the student population. And it's those kinds of things that I think they go on a fairly regular basis, but at this particular time, the court has also injected their opinion, which brings me to the topic of why is the Supreme Court there. The legislature is charged with providing an adequate and equitable education for the students of Kansas. And my thought is, if the legislature is truly doing its job of providing an adequate and equitable education for students, then there are no lawsuits from the school districts saying that we are not. And if there are no lawsuits, then there is no intervention by the Supreme Court. And that's the point where I would like to be. I think that schools need to be held accountable for the money that is given to them. We need to know that the students that are being educated in our system come out with an education and with an opportunity to further their education or to go on into the workplace with the skills that will make them successful. We need to make sure that we're not graduating kids that can't read their own diplomas. We need to make sure that we are creating a product that will help the state become a productive part of the state once they graduate from high school. And we can do that in a number of ways. You can do it with testing. You can do that with some other methods. But I think it is important that we do hold schools accountable. We need to hold every agency accountable. But I think that what Representative Johnson said is correct. The higher you go up the ladder, the more difficult it is to wrap your arms around efficiency. But I tour places that I've never been to before now. And when I tour those places, I see laser-focused people making the best use of funds in their agency because, frankly, they don't have enough money. OCCK, that I visited back in December, is working with an $18 million budget. Sounds like a lot of money. 8 years ago, they had $21 million. And their demand for their services is up. And so they're having to do more with fewer people. It's making a real strain on those people, and it's something that needs to be addressed over time as well. But the situation we've had since the 2112 tax policy was implemented has really challenged and put a strain on government agencies to maintain a good level of service to the citizens of Kansas without having the resources that they really need. So I guess that's my take on it.
All right, we have about.
May I?
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
I appreciate the question, and that's why I wanted to answer it. I think there are a couple of ways to go with that, and one is that it doesn't take long to figure out that there is waste in government. Go over to the docking building and open up the locked door to find shrink-wrapped, brand-new computers that are outdated, just sitting there on pallets, ready to go. We have plenty of examples of that where your tax dollars have been absolutely thrown away. And while we're picking on the Department of Admin, I'd just point out that they've engaged in a number of $24 a square foot, 25-year leases for state office space. It makes one want to go into the office space business in Topeka, Kansas, where the average rent rate is half that, and the average span of a lease is far below 10 years. Yet somehow the state, and these are your tax dollars, you're getting fleeced, somehow the state has to have these 25-year leases at $24 a square foot. And leases, and this is the part where we don't really have a say because the Supreme Court said that leases are a function of the executive. So the legislature, your elected officials, really have no say. We don't get to say, hey, stop doing that. Instead, you get fleeced unabated. But what does that lead to when leases are a function of the executive and there's no oversight from the legislative body? Well, now there's an end run around bonding because the lease purchase exists. So now your tax dollars can be committed to $150 million projects without bonding or any oversight or appropriation through the legislative process by simply entering into a lease purchase agreement at the executive level. That's what happens. Not in the newspaper, might be a little more complicated than people want to digest, but you are now in a position to be fleeced without any of your elected officials being able to say anything about it. I'd also point out that agencies like KDOT with 2,265 employees across the 82,000 square mile state of Kansas have 108 offices in 3 layers of division across the state of Kansas in a state with 105 counties. The number of offices is outrageous. Consolidation can absolutely happen. It can happen without us really doing much of anything except saying, hey, KDOT, why in the world would you have 108 offices? That's getting a little ridiculous. And then realizing savings through that. I think the Alvarez and Marshall study showed that there was about $6 million in savings just by consolidating the middle layer, not even touching the 108. Keep the 108, keep the district offices, which we have one here in Salina, but get rid of that middle layer of offices that exist across the state, which are duplicative of the other layers. And that's $6 million of taxpayer dollars, and I don't think it'd change services at all. So those are the things that we weigh, though, is, can service delivery still happen under these efficiencies? And I think they absolutely can. You look at the Lansing project, Lansing, by tearing it down and rebuilding new, you're able to operate with half the number of employees. The savings in employee dollars then pays the entirety of the serviceable debt on that. We don't have to spend more money at all to get that accomplished. And then we have a modern facility that over time recoups all of that cost, and in fact gives us the opportunity for about $1.5 to $2 million in raises for corrections employees across the system. So as far as holding them accountable, I think there's many opportunities to do that. It's whether or not there is a will of those in the legislature to do so, and then also to push back or find ways to prevent these types of lease purchase agreements that commit hundreds of millions. I mean, I'm not even kidding here. It's hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer funds that are being committed to lease purchases across the state that have zero oversight.
That was a good question, whoever asked it, because that prompted a lot of really good comments, so thank you. We have, gosh, it's about a quarter till, so we either can do a question or we could just go with closing remarks. I don't know if, no, one more. And this one this I think it says for the panel of four, there may be one of you who's more, again, well-versed in answering it, but it says, with regard to capers and working after retirement, why are there different sets of rules for various groups? For example, legislators are exempt and allowed to work after retiring and drawing capers, but educators are not, even though we face a teacher shortage in the state. So again, I think the question is, why are there different sets of rules for working after retirement and drawing capers?
So I am not on capers this year. I know they're continuing to work through it. Actually, legislators are not exempt. Everyone is exempt to a certain threshold of earnings, and they are exempt until that happens. And legislators actually have a slightly different one. I don't happen to fall under it, but the mileage and per diem count in addition to the salary towards the threshold because they are payments. So our legislators who happen to live farther away hit that threshold pretty quickly, and those who are closer make it a little bit longer. I think virtually all have hit it at this point, where they either stop taking their pay or they stop taking the capers payment, as I understand that. So then the next piece, there are different plans. So the KP&F plan is designed to retire at a different age than some of the other plans that are there. As we have worked through time, then different exceptions were made, each of them with good intent to try and say, how do we help different groups be able to work and retire, et cetera, underneath, and we absolutely need access, particularly in education, to our pool of retired educators and administrators so that we can operate. What we saw happening when I was there, as the number of folks who would retire and return to work, we actually saw that become the process when we had the previous rule that had a 3-year sunset that you could stay at the same district and essentially retire in place. The IRS said, if you continue that rule, we may tell you that you are not a retirement plan, but a deferred compensation plan, which is fully legal. It is your choice. The only thing that is different is then on the federal side, you are fully taxable on all payments to the plan and on all earnings in the plan, just like you are saving in a savings account versus something in a retirement plan, which would have very negative consequences for those who weren't working under that particular plan, as they would then have the tax impact of the change in the IRS code for the type of plan that it was. What we saw in that one, and it actually makes sense, I want employees that figure out how to maximize compensation. I want people who are that analytical to do that. But when we saw the graphs of retirement activity, under that 3-year window that we saw, the retirement happened at the point someone achieved 85 points, and it was a spike at that point that came back down and leveled off, where under the under plans you tended to have more of a normal distribution around a retirement age of when someone might choose to retire. The ability to retire but continue working was what appeared to be a way to have an incentive to get paid slightly more under retiring, drawing capers, and being able to continue to work in the same or a similar position. That then created an issue which the actuary also paid attention to, as the IRS was, to say, if you persist in this policy, we are going to count that as part of your unfunded liability. We actually don't know what it is because they did not then calculate what that was, but they're going to recalculate what we would owe on the unfunded liability, assuming it was then a policy that folks could retire at the point of 85 points rather than retiring at an age that typically folks actually stopped working. So those behaviors, the impact of the IRS and the actuary, were what everyone was trying to grapple with, as you had policies that came at different points in time to try and provide flexibility, which is actually good. We would like flexibility for folks to be able to access the employees that are needed. We had to be careful about incenting behaviors under those, and that's why it is literally a mess of rules that is almost impossible for particularly our school administrators to understand. I know that they have been working on that throughout the session to try and particularly simplify the school rules so that there's actually a way to operate in that spaghetti of regulations that are around capers and working after retirement. I actually can't explain what they are doing to try and simplify that, but there are a couple of good people working on that who are well suited. If you have something specific.
Yes, I bring my cheat sheet with me. This is actually a Senate bill. Senate Bill 21, House Substitute, on the Committee Financial Institutions and Pensions, sunsetting and collapsing special exemptions and modifying certain other working after retirement provisions. It passed out of the House, but now it is still under a conference committee had been appointed. So they are working on something. I don't know the details. It doesn't go into that in this particular. This is just a Senate and House action report. So there's some movement there, but I don't know if Senator Hardy has anything he can add to that if he doesn't sit on that committee. But that would be a different Senate. But apparently there is some movement there, but I'm just sorry that I'm not able to do it. But it's Senate Bill 21.
Okay. I apologize, but that is probably all the time we have for questions. I apologize if I didn't get to yours. We did cover a lot, and that last question prompted an awful lot of discussion, so whoever asked that was good. But I wanted to just say before closing remarks, we usually thank you all for attending, obviously. I'd like to thank the legislators. We got through a lot of questions. Appreciate your thoughtful answers. Clearly, there's a lot of big issues, and we sure appreciate you representing our area. So we'll finish. We've got about 10 minutes if each of you want to take a few for closing remarks.
Thank you once again for coming out. You're a large part of the reason why government works. It takes citizen involvement and engagement for good things to happen in this state. So I appreciate each and every one of you coming out and spending time with us today. There's one thing that I didn't come up, and since it's a Senate idea, I thought I would mention it. There was one idea in terms of funding our school funding issue was brought up by Senator Denning, and he wanted to add $2.25 to each of our utility bills to help pay for that. And I think that from what I've known, just walking up and down the halls of the State House, that bill probably won't be in any final solution. We're going to the concept was good. He has a good money mind, sort of like Representative Johnson. But what happens when you put money into a utility bill is it becomes segregated. You cannot rate it like we could as if it was a sales tax or income tax amount. But the problem with it is it's about as regressive a tax as you can imagine, much more regressive than a sales tax on something. So I think that little tidbit probably will not get very far in the Senate. So anyway, I do appreciate everyone coming. Come up front, take a look at the bill. I'm going to have my sign up. I'm going to bring it up here. If at the end of the meeting, and I'm happy to talk to you about any individual issues that you might have in mind too. Thanks.
So thanks again to our sponsors and to all of you. I think we hit most of the issues pretty well. But I really do want to reiterate, as you see the inefficiencies, and while we do get a lot of information, and the tours are very helpful, and the presentations that folks bring to the budget committees, I'm on the Ag Budget Committee, which is largely fee-funded, so it doesn't much affect the state general fund and taxation. But when you bounce into that, either as a vendor or as a customer or as just an observer, it's the everyday operations, it's the accounts payable that help us to see where is that working and not. Then there's also mentioned, we oversee the state general fund, but there's an all funds budget, which is more than the state general fund. We look at the taxes that we need to balance the state general fund, but there is a lot that is done through the executive branch and others as well. Fully understanding all of the numbers and the assumptions that go into any project is always key to try and get there. There are a lot of ideas coming up. We heard the idea in the Senate about the fee on utilities earlier this week. We met with, I think, 16 of the utility lobbyists, with a few of us on the tax committee to say, okay, we don't know if this has legs or not. How does that go? Educate us about how that impact is. Help us better understand. We have fiscal notes from the Department of Revenue, but within about 4 hours, they gave us a much more thorough fiscal note on what would happen if we actually just went back to a tax, which they would prefer versus a fee, and ways that could be levied should that manage to go forward. They're not thrilled with any of those, but we try to at least stay on top of what's going on with each of those, and thankfully, there are a lot of entities that can help us get our arms around the impact of some of the things that happen. But the things that you see, that's key as well, and appreciate the guidance that you have on what you'd like us to do. So have a great day, and thanks for being here.
I would like to kind of weigh off on some of the discussions right now as far as finances and things. These are things that are certainly important and important to all of us, but I like to look at the human side of things as well and the community of which we serve. And I have two examples of that. There was a young man who was from Texas, and he went to Kansas Wesleyan, a member of the team, baseball team here at Kansas Wesleyan. And while in class, he suffered a heart attack. And his classmate and fellow baseball player had just taken a CPR class the night before and was able to resuscitate him. The young man was in a coma for a while, and then after he had some surgery, and he's going through rehab right now. But I wanted to recognize the young man, Rex Campbell, who saved this young man's life. And we tried to get him to the State House, and they had a rain out on one of their baseball games, was unable to get there. So it turned out that I was able to present a plaque, or one of our certificates, in a frame to him the night that they had their sports athletic awards. And I thought how appropriate that he was able to be in front of his classmates to receive this. And I was honored to do that. And I'm always trying to find that human side of the people who live in my district that I represent. One short story here is another gentleman, I think I mentioned this once before. He is a retired military, 92 years old, and has not been able to receive a China medal of his service while during World War II. He was stationed in China, and for some reason they were thinking he was a civilian. I don't think anybody would go over there during the war as a civilian and work in inspecting meat. That they had to have a locker or a regular slaughterhouse because the Army, the unit there, was not able to get all of their K rations or C rations to them, so they had their own slaughterhouse and got their own meat. Well, these two volunteered so they could be promoted, and they were inspectors of meat over in China. Just yesterday, I was informed, after continuously trying to get a hold of our state representatives and our national representatives, he has finally been okayed to receive the China medal, which will mean a lot to him. However, they no longer make the China medal. So now what we're trying to do is be able to find someone who will donate one so that we can present it to him. But perseverance does pay off, and it's been such an honor to be able to work with these two incidences, to know that, you know, you can reach out to your government. You know, we're sitting up there doing your job. We're not king of the hill. We have all, in our hearts, all of your best interests at heart. And thank you so much for inviting us once again, and thank you for those sponsors.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you again to the Salina Chamber of Commerce, AT&T, for sponsoring this event, and of course everyone who came out this morning and asked such great questions. You know, a lot of exciting things going on. I know some of this is a little doom and gloom because they're difficult decisions that have to be made that are in front of us, and solutions that have to be found. And I think all of us want to be part of those solutions. But there are some other things going on that I think are worth noting. Here in the next week, we're going to be talking with the folks over at the Department of Education, and Dina Horst has been so kind as to join us with that, to start talking about pathways programs for unmanned systems in our high schools and leading into technical colleges, to start expanding the programs that come out of K-State Polytechnic here in Salina, and start pushing that across the state, and lead into attending K-State Polytechnic as a university of choice for these students who start out in high school, then being able to get introduced to that technology and start moving down that road. And that's a program that we're hoping to start next year, in fact, in coordination with K-State and, of course, our technical colleges, and then our K-12 education institutions across the state. So we do have some neat things happening kind of behind the scenes as we go through this process. And, of course, we have a lot of downtime as we wait for plans to come to fruition during conference committee reports. So a lot of those types of meetings are taking place while we're up there. I've also had the opportunity to meet with K-Dot Aviation concerning some of the things that we want to do moving forward with our universities and the research triangle between KU, K-State Polytechnic, and Wichita State when it comes to attempting to bring in jobs. The charter for K-Dot Aviation, in fact, created in 1975, actually has them responsible for economic development in the area of aerospace in the state of Kansas, not the Department of Commerce. So we're attempting to build that out so that we have economic development officers at the state level that we can start to rely on for that type of economic development, as opposed to going to commerce, which is an inch deep and a mile wide. And that's important because right now the state of Nebraska actually has more of an economic development entity for their aviation side than the state of Kansas does. And we have more aircraft coming out of this state than any other state in the union. And that's important because we're losing it. So again, back to the doom and gloom side, Oklahoma, an increase of about 90% in aerospace jobs since 2006. Kansas, a decline of almost 20% since 2006. The jobs aren't leaving because of the decline in the industry. They are going somewhere else. Those jobs exist, and they exist somewhere else. We are losing them. And that's why HB 2036 is so important, because our economic development folks, both here and eventually at the state level too, they need to have the tools to be able to bring those businesses in. Right now, Missouri has a 20-year tax abatement when it comes to being able to do IRBs and things like that. We have a 10-year. We're already at strategic disadvantages with the tools that we do have. And we need to give them the tools to do this. So when we go through this process of increasing taxes, which is coming, when we go through this process of a budget that spends less in areas that we need for infrastructure, and we start moving down the road of a school finance program too, we need to keep in mind that there has to be something in there that allows us to grow those jobs, to grow our population, to give our kids a reason to stay. Educating and exporting our kids just simply isn't an option moving forward, and that's what's going to happen if we continue to focus on the big three and not the big four. So I would respectfully submit that if you have the opportunity to contact legislators, that you do so on HB 2036, HB 2168, and HB 2184, which are all extremely important to be able to give us an opportunity to grow our way out of this problem permanently, as opposed to simply asking that we rifle through your pockets year after year after year to find these dollars to be able to sustain these programs that we want. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks again for attending, everybody. Have a nice day.